Imagine a world where the year 1914 passed without the eruption of global conflict. Picture Europe not engulfed in the flames of war, but grappling with the tensions of a new century. This is the alternate history we'll explore, a world where the Great War never happened. It's a journey into the unknown, a thought experiment with profound implications for our present. The First World War was a cataclysmic event, forever etching itself onto the tapestry of human history. It reshaped borders, toppled empires, and gave rise to ideologies that would define the 20th century. But what if it never happened? What if the intricate web of alliances, the simmering national rivalries, and the fateful assassination in Sarajevo had all unfolded differently? The absence of this global conflict would have had a ripple effect across time, altering the trajectory of nations and the lives of millions. It's a tantalizing what-if scenario, one that forces us to confront the fragility of peace and the profound consequences of even the smallest changes in the course of history. Let's step into this alternate timeline and explore a world where the guns of August remained silent and the world held its breath, not in fear, but in anticipation of a future unwritten. The early 20th century was a time of great uncertainty in Europe, a continent teetering on the edge of monumental change. The continent was a powder keg of competing empires, nationalistic fervor, and a tangled web of alliances, each nation vying for supremacy and influence. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 provided the spark that ignited this powder keg. But what if that spark had never come? What if Europe had managed to avoid the catastrophic conflict that followed? Without the outbreak of war, Europe would have remained a pressure cooker of political tension, with unresolved issues simmering beneath the surface. The great powers, Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, would have continued to vie for dominance, their rivalries playing out on the diplomatic stage in a constant struggle for power and influence. The delicate balance of power, maintained through alliances and treaties, would have been tested time and again, with each nation seeking to outmaneuver the others. The absence of war might have forced these nations to find new ways to resolve their differences, perhaps through more intense diplomatic efforts and negotiations. Diplomacy, already a cornerstone of international relations, might have taken on even greater importance, with leaders striving to maintain peace through dialogue and compromise. International organizations, precursors to the League of Nations or the United Nations, might have emerged earlier, providing a forum for dialogue and conflict resolution, and potentially averting larger conflicts. However, the underlying tensions that led to war nationalism, economic competition, and territorial disputes would not have simply vanished. These issues would have continued to create friction among nations. Without the cathartic, albeit devastating release of war, these tensions might have festered, leading to smaller regional conflicts or a delayed but even more catastrophic global war as nations struggled to assert their dominance. The question is not whether war would have been avoided altogether, but rather what form it might have taken, and when it might have eventually erupted, as the forces of history continued to shape the destiny of Europe. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended World War I, marking a significant moment in global history. However, it also sowed the seeds of future conflicts, creating a fragile peace that would not last. The treaty's harsh punishments on Germany, including territorial losses, crippling reparations, and acceptance of war guilt, bred deep resentment and instability in the heart of Europe, setting the stage for future turmoil. In our alternate timeline, without a World War I, there would be no Treaty of Versailles, and the geopolitical landscape would be vastly different. The map of Europe, redrawn with the stroke of a pen in 1919, would have remained largely unchanged, preserving the pre-war borders and political structures. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, both dissolved after the war, might have survived, albeit in weakened states, potentially evolving into more modern states over time. The absence of the treaty's punitive measures could have fostered a greater sense of stability and cooperation in Europe, allowing nations to rebuild and recover without the burden of excessive reparations. Without the Treaty of Versailles to poison the well of international relations, the League of Nations, formed in the war's aftermath, might have had a stronger foundation for success, potentially becoming a more effective body. With less animosity and resentment to contend with, the League could have potentially been more effective in promoting international cooperation and preventing future conflicts, creating a more peaceful world order. Of course, even without the Treaty of Versailles, there's no guarantee of lasting peace, as human nature and political ambitions often lead to conflict. The underlying causes of conflict, nationalism, economic competition, and political rivalry would still exist, driving nations to compete and clash. However, the absence of the treaty's bitterness and resentment might have created a more conducive environment for diplomacy and peaceful resolution, offering a glimmer of hope for a more stable geopolitical landscape. The rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century, particularly Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, was deeply intertwined with the aftermath of World War I. The war's end left Europe in a state of disarray, with many countries grappling with the consequences of a devastating conflict. The war's devastation, economic turmoil, and political instability created fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. The economic depression of the 1920s further exacerbated these conditions, leading to widespread discontent and a yearning for radical change. Without World War I, the social, economic, and political conditions that fueled the rise of these regimes would have been vastly different. The pre-war period, while not without its issues, did not present the same level of crisis that post-war Europe faced. Germany, spared the humiliation and economic hardship of defeat, might not have been as susceptible to the allure of Nazi ideology. The Treaty of Versailles, which imposed harsh penalties on Germany, was a significant factor in the nation's descent into extremism. The Soviet Union, without the chaos of war and revolution, might have followed a different path, potentially averting the rise of Stalin and the horrors of his regime. The Russian Revolution was a direct consequence of the war's impact on the Russian Empire. However, it's important to remember that the seeds of totalitarianism were sown before the war. The early 20th century was already a time of significant political and social upheaval, with many movements advocating for radical change. Extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, and a deep distrust of democracy were already present in many European societies. These ideologies were not new, but the war provided a catalyst for their more extreme manifestations. Without World War I as a catalyst, these ideologies might have developed differently, potentially manifesting in new and unforeseen ways. The absence of a major conflict could have led to a more gradual and less violent evolution of these ideas. The absence of war might have even led to a different kind of totalitarian threat. Instead of the overtly aggressive regimes we saw, there could have been more insidious forms of control emerging from within existing political structures. Without the specter of war and the need for strongman leadership, totalitarian ideologies might have infiltrated democratic institutions more subtly, eroding freedoms from within. This subtle erosion could have been just as dangerous, if not more so, than the overt totalitarian regimes that did emerge. The question is not whether totalitarianism would have emerged, but rather what form it might have taken and how it might have manifested in a world untouched by the global conflict of World War I. The alternate paths history could have taken are a fascinating subject for speculation and study.